Tonight, we will gently explore the religious world of the ancient Roman people. Imagine, for a moment, the soft glow of oil lamps flickering against the walls of a Roman home. Outside, the streets of the city grow quiet as night settles over the hills of Rome. Somewhere in the distance, the faint sound of sandals on stone fades away, and a household prepares for sleep. But before anyone rests, a small ritual takes place. At the corner of the home stands a tiny shrine. A father, mother, or perhaps the oldest child places a small offering, maybe a piece of bread, a drop of wine, or a pinch of incense. A quiet prayer is spoken. The offering is made not to a distant god in a faraway temple, but to the spirits believed to live within the home itself. For the Roman people, religion was not something that happened only in temples or on special holy days. Instead, it was woven into the rhythm of everyday life. Every meal, every journey, every important decision might begin with a prayer or ritual. The Romans believed that the world around them was filled with unseen forces, spirits, gods, and divine powers that influenced everything from the harvest of crops to the safety of a newborn child. Their religion was not centered on a single sacred book or one unified set of beliefs. Instead, it was a collection of traditions that developed slowly over many centuries. It began in the earliest days of the small farming communities that would eventually grow into the powerful civilization we now call ancient Rome. Long before Rome ruled an empire stretching across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East, it was simply a modest settlement of farmers and herders along the banks of the Tiber River. In those early days, people looked to nature for signs of divine power. Storms, rivers, forests, and mountains all seemed to hold mysterious forces that could help or harm human life. These early Romans believed that every part of the natural world possessed a kind of spirit or presence. A tree might contain a sacred force. A spring of water might be protected by a divine being. Even the boundaries of a field or the doorway of a house were thought to be watched over by invisible guardians. Modern historians often describe this early stage of Roman religion as deeply practical. The Romans were less concerned with philosophical questions about the nature of the gods and more focused on maintaining a respectful relationship with them. If the proper rituals were performed and the correct offerings made, the gods would continue to protect the community. This relationship between humans and the divine was sometimes described by a simple idea: Diutida, a Latin phrase meaning, I give so that you may give. In other words, people offered sacrifices and prayers in the hope that the gods would respond with protection, good fortune, or success. But unlike many later religions, the Roman approach to the divine was often calm and orderly rather than emotional or mystical. Their rituals followed precise traditions. Specific words had to be spoken. Offerings had to be given in the correct way. If a mistake occurred during a ceremony, the entire ritual might have to be performed again from the beginning. This careful attention to ritual reflected something important about Roman culture. The Romans valued discipline, order, and respect for tradition. Just as the Roman army relied on careful planning and strict organization, Roman religion also followed established rules that had been passed down through generations. At the same time, Roman religion was surprisingly flexible. As Rome grew from a small village into a powerful city, it came into contact with many different cultures. Rather than rejecting foreign beliefs, the Romans often welcomed them. If a neighboring people worshipped a powerful god, the Romans sometimes adopted that god into their own religious system. This openness meant that Roman religion slowly became a vast collection of traditions, stories, and divine figures gathered from across the ancient world. Some gods had originally come from the neighboring Etruscans. Others were influenced by the myths of the Greeks. Still others arrived later from Egypt, Persia, and distant eastern lands. Despite this growing diversity, the core idea remained the same. The gods must be respected, rituals must be performed correctly, and harmony must be maintained between the human world and the divine. Religion also played an important role in public life. Before battles, Roman generals consulted priests and diviners. Government meetings might begin with sacrifices. Even the founding of cities or construction of buildings could require religious ceremonies to ensure the approval of the gods. In this way, religion and politics were deeply connected. The prosperity of Rome itself was believed to depend on maintaining the favor of the gods. If disasters struck, such as famine, plague, or military defeat, many Romans believed it might be a sign that the proper rituals had been neglected. Yet Roman religion was not always solemn or serious. Many religious celebrations were joyful public festivals filled with music, feasting, games, and laughter. Entire cities might pause from work to celebrate the gods with colorful processions and theatrical performances. During these festivals, temples were decorated, sacrifices were offered, and the streets filled with people enjoying days of celebration. These events reminded Romans that religion was not only about duty and ritual, but also about community and shared traditions. As we continue our quiet journey into the religious world of ancient Rome, we will explore the many layers of belief that shaped Roman life. We will discover the household spirits that guarded family homes, the powerful gods worshipped in grand temples, and the mysterious rituals used to interpret the will of the divine. We will also see how Roman religion changed as Rome itself grew, from a small village surrounded by farmland into one of the greatest empires in human history. But to truly understand Roman religion, we must first travel back to the earliest days of the Roman people, to a time when the city of Rome did not yet exist as a great capital of marble and stone. A time when the hills beside the Tiber River were dotted with simple huts, and when the beliefs of the Romans were shaped by the quiet rhythms of farming life. In the next part of our story, we will explore those earliest traditions, the ancient spiritual ideas that formed the foundation of Roman religion. And like the slow turning of seasons in the fields outside early Rome, the story of these beliefs begins quietly, long before temples, emperors, or mighty armies ever appeared. As we continue our quiet journey into the religious world of the ancient Romans, we now travel back even further in time. Long before great stone temples rose above the hills of Rome, before triumphal arches and crowded forums, there were only small farming communities scattered across the Italian countryside. The people who would one day call themselves Romans lived simple lives. Their homes were small huts made from wood, mud, and thatch. Smoke drifted gently from cooking fires. Chickens wandered between houses, and nearby fields stretched toward low green hills. Life followed the steady rhythm of the seasons. In spring, seeds were planted. In summer, crops grew beneath the warm Mediterranean sun. And in autumn, harvest brought relief and celebration. And winter was a time of rest, storytelling, and quiet waiting. For these early people, survival depended almost entirely on the forces of nature. Rain needed to fall at the right time. Rivers must not flood too violently. Crops had to grow strong enough to feed families through the year, because their lives depended so deeply on the natural world. Early Romans believed that nature itself was filled with unseen powers. They did not always imagine these forces as gods with human shapes or personalities. Instead, they believed in mysterious divine presences that lived within objects, places, and actions. Modern historians often describe these presences using the Latin word numen. A numen was not exactly a god in the way we might think of one today. It was more like a sacred force or spirit that existed within something. A river might possess a numen. A forest clearing might contain a numen. Even the act of opening a door or crossing a boundary could involve a divine presence. The early Romans, the world was quietly alive with these invisible powers. If a farmer walked through his field at dawn, he might pause for a moment before beginning his work. A small prayer might be spoken to the spirit of the land, asking for protection over the crops. When someone entered a forest, they might tread carefully, believing that ancient spirits watched silently from the trees. Even a spring of fresh water bubbling up from the earth might be treated with respect. Offerings of flowers, coins, or food could be placed nearby as a sign of gratitude to the spirit believed to dwell there. These beliefs created a kind of spiritual landscape where humans and divine forces lived side by side. But the early Romans did not simply fear these powers. Instead, they believed that humans could live in harmony with them by showing proper respect. This is where ritual became so important. A ritual might be something very small and simple. A whispered prayer, a few drops of wine poured onto the ground, a small cake left at a shrine. Yet each ritual followed traditions that had been passed down through generations. The exact words mattered, the timing mattered. Even the direction a person faced while speaking a prayer could matter. If a ritual was performed correctly, It helped maintain balance between the human world and the unseen powers surrounding it if something went wrong, if the words were forgotten, or an offering was missed. People sometimes believed that the spirits might become displeased in this way. Religion was not separate from daily life. It was simply part of the routine of living. The Romans did not always gather in large congregations to worship together. Instead, religion happened quietly in homes, fields, and village spaces. Small shrines might appear beside crossroads or along the edges of farmland. Travelers could stop briefly, leaving a simple offering before continuing their journey. Some of the earliest Roman gods were closely connected to agriculture. This makes sense when we remember how central farming was to survival. There were divine powers associated with planting seeds, protecting young crops, guiding harvests, and storing grain safely for the winter. In fact, the Romans sometimes believed that nearly every stage of farming had its own divine guardian. One spirit might watch over the moment a seed touched the soil. Another might protect the young sprout pushing upward through the earth. Yet another might guard the harvested grain stored in barns. To modern readers, this may seem like an incredibly large number of divine beings. But for early Romans, it reflected a deep awareness of how fragile life could be, that a single storm could destroy a harvest, a disease among animals could threaten an entire village. Because of this uncertainty, it made sense to ask for divine help at every stage of life. But religion was not only about fields and crops. The earliest Romans also believed that families were protected by ancestral spirits. These spirits were thought to remain connected to their descendants even after death. They watched over households and helped guide the lives of future generations. Because of this belief, remembering and honoring ancestors became an important part of Roman religious life. Families might keep small memorial objects inside their homes. Stories of grandparents and great-grandparents were repeated across generations. By honoring the past, Romans believed they strengthened the protection surrounding their household. At the same time, these traditions created a powerful sense of continuity. Each generation was connected to the one before it. Parents taught their children the correct rituals, prayers, and customs, ensuring that the traditions would survive into the future. As villages grew and communities became more organized, some religious practices slowly became shared among larger groups of people. Certain sacred spaces, groves of trees, hilltops, or springs, became gathering places for ceremonies. Over time, these communal rituals began to shape the earliest public forms of Roman religion. But it is important to remember that these early beliefs were still very different from the elaborate mythology that many people associate with Rome today. Stories about powerful gods such as Jupiter, Mars, or Venus would become more prominent later, especially as Roman culture encountered the myths of the Greeks. In the earliest centuries, Roman religion was much quieter. It was focused less on dramatic stories and more on maintaining respectful relationships with the divine forces believed to guide everyday life. Imagine, for a moment, a Roman farmer standing at the edge of his field at sunrise. The air is cool. Mist drifts across the ground. The first light of morning touches the distant hills. Before beginning the day's work, he places a small offering on a stone at the field's edge, perhaps a little bread, perhaps a splash of wine. That he whispers a short prayer, not loudly, not dramatically, but with calm familiarity. It is simply part of the routine, but a small gesture of respect toward the unseen forces believed to watch over the land. This quiet moment captures something essential about early Roman religion, that it was not always grand or spectacular. More often, it was gentle, steady, and woven into the ordinary moments of life. And as the centuries passed, these humble traditions would slowly grow into the complex religious system of the Roman Republic and, later, the Roman Empire. But the heart of Roman religion would always remain close to home. In the next part of our story, we will step inside a Roman household and explore the small but deeply meaningful rituals that took place within the family home. There, at tiny shrines, glowing softly in the lamplight, Romans honored the spirits believed to guard their families every single day. As night slowly settles over the ancient city of Rome, the streets begin to grow quieter. Merchants close their stalls in the marketplace. Bakers extinguish their ovens after a long day of work. The distant sounds of carts rolling over stone roads gradually fade into the evening air. Inside Roman homes, families gather for the final meal of the day. Oil lamps glow softly, casting gentle shadows across the walls. The smell of bread, olives, and warm stew fills the room. But before anyone eats, something small and meaningful often takes place in many Roman houses, especially those of ordinary families. There was a small shrine built into the wall. This shrine was called a lararium. It might be a simple painted niche or a small wooden cabinet decorated with tiny statues that to modern eyes, it might look modest. But to the Romans, it was one of the most important places in the home. The lararium was the place where the family honored the spirits believed to protect their household. These spirits were known as the lares. The lares were not distant gods living high in the heavens. Instead, they were believed to be guardians who watched over the home itself. Some Romans believed the lares were spirits connected to the land where the house stood. Others believed they were protective ancestors who remained close to the family. Either way, the lares were thought to quietly guard the household, ensuring the safety and well-being of everyone living inside. Small statues of the lares often showed two young figures dancing happily, holding drinking horns or small bowls. Their cheerful appearance reflected the idea that they brought protection, prosperity, and joy to the family. But the lares were not the only spirits honored in the home. Another important group of divine protectors were known as the Penates. The Penates were guardians of food and the household's supply of nourishment. In a world where food shortages could easily threaten survival, protecting the family's stored grain and provisions was extremely important. Because of this, the Penates were often associated with the pantry or storage areas of the house. Families believed these spirits ensured that the household would always have enough to eat. Together, the lares and the Penates formed a kind of spiritual protection surrounding the family. Everyday rituals helped maintain this relationship that a father, mother, or sometimes the oldest child might place a small offering at the lararium. This could be something very simple: a piece of bread, a bit of fruit, a pinch of salt, or a small splash of wine poured into a bowl. These offerings were not meant to be extravagant. Instead, they were gestures of gratitude and respect. The Romans believed that by remembering the spirits each day, they strengthened the invisible bond between the household and its divine guardians. Morning prayers might ask for protection during the coming day. Evening offerings could express thanks for the family's safety in wealthier homes. The lararium could be quite beautifully decorated. Painted scenes sometimes showed the lares standing beside a central figure representing the spirit of the household itself. But even in the humblest homes, a simple shrine served the same purpose. Religion, in this sense, was deeply personal. It lived inside the home rather than only in public temples. Another spirit honored by Roman families was known as the genius. The genius was believed to be a protective spirit connected to an individual person. Every man was thought to possess a genius that guided his life and protected his destiny. Women had a similar spirit known as a Juno. The genius represented the life force or creative power within a person on special occasions, especially birthdays. Romans sometimes made offerings to their own genius. This might include incense, wine, or small cakes. These rituals reflected the Roman belief that human life itself was accompanied by divine protection. Important family events were also marked with religious ceremonies. When a child was born, prayers and offerings were made asking the gods and household spirits to protect the newborn. The first days of a baby's life were considered especially fragile, and many rituals focused on guarding the child from harmful spirits. Marriage ceremonies also contained religious elements. When a bride entered her husband's home for the first time, she was symbolically welcomed into the protection of his household gods. She might carry a small offering or participate in rituals that connected her to the lares of the new family. Even daily activities sometimes had small rituals attached to them. Before beginning a journey, a traveler might stop briefly at the household shrine. A short prayer could ask for safe passage. Before planting seeds in a garden, someone might whisper a blessing to the earth. These actions were not always elaborate or dramatic. Often, they lasted only a few seconds. Yet over time, these small moments created a rhythm of spiritual awareness woven into everyday life. Roman homes themselves were often designed in ways that reflected this connection between family and religion in many traditional Roman houses. The central room was called the atrium. This open space allowed light to enter from above through a small opening in the roof. Rainwater fell through this opening into a shallow pool in the floor called the impluvium. Near this central area, the lararium was often placed where everyone in the household could see it easily. In this way, the protective spirits of the family remained symbolically present in the daily life of the home. Guests entering the house might notice the shrine and understand immediately that the family respected traditional customs. Even servants and enslaved people living in the household often participated in these rituals. Although Roman society was highly unequal, religious traditions within the home sometimes involved everyone who lived there. Festivals also brought special attention to household gods. During certain celebrations, families decorated the lararium with garlands of flowers. Extra offerings might be placed before the statues, and prayers were spoken with greater ceremony. One particularly meaningful celebration occurred during the winter festival known as Saturnalia, when many families honored their household spirits alongside the larger public celebrations happening throughout Rome. These domestic rituals helped strengthen the Roman sense of family identity. The household was more than just a place to sleep or eat. It was a sacred space protected by invisible guardians. Children growing up in Roman homes learned these customs naturally. They watched their parents perform rituals, listened to prayers, and eventually began participating themselves. Over time, these traditions became deeply familiar, almost automatic. Lighting a lamp, placing a small offering, whispering a brief prayer. None of these actions took very long, but together they created a quiet sense that the home was surrounded by protection. As Rome grew from a small settlement into a large and powerful city, these household traditions remained remarkably consistent. Even wealthy senators and military generals continued to honor the Laras and Penates in their homes, just as farmers and craftsmen did. It was one of the ways Roman religion connected every level of society. Whether rich or poor, powerful or ordinary, nearly everyone shared the belief that unseen spirits guarded their household. But beyond the walls of private homes, religion also existed on a much larger scale. Across the city of Rome and throughout the growing Roman Republic, priests organized ceremonies, sacrifices, and public rituals intended to protect the entire community. Large temples were built to honor powerful gods, and religious officials carefully supervised the ceremonies that maintained Rome's relationship with the divine. In the next part of our journey, we will step outside the quiet world of family homes and explore the public side of Roman religion. There, we will meet the priests of Rome, visit the grand temples of the city, and discover how carefully organized rituals helped guide the spiritual life of an entire civilization. And as we will see, these ceremonies were performed with the same careful attention that Romans gave to even the smallest prayer whispered beside a household shrine. As dawn slowly rises over the ancient city of Rome, the first light of morning touches the tops of temples scattered across the hills. The streets begin to awaken. Shopkeepers prepare their stalls, farmers lead animals toward the markets, and the quiet murmur of daily life begins again. But while many Romans begin their ordinary routines, another group of people prepares for something different. These are the priests of Rome. Unlike the priests of many later religions, Roman priests were not separate from society. They did not usually live apart in monasteries or dedicate their entire lives solely to spiritual meditation. Instead, Roman priests were often ordinary citizens who held religious responsibilities alongside their political and social duties. Many priests were respected members of Rome's leading families. Some were senators, judges, or military leaders. Their religious role was considered a public service to the community rather than a completely separate profession. The task of these priests was not to preach sermons or teach moral philosophy. Instead, their main responsibility was to ensure that the rituals honoring the gods were performed correctly. In Roman religion, the accuracy of ritual was extremely important. Every ceremony followed a precise tradition. The words spoken during prayers had to be exact. The sequence of actions had to follow established rules that had been preserved for generations. If a priest made a mistake, perhaps mispronouncing a word or dropping an offering, the ceremony might need to begin again from the start. This careful attention reflected the Roman belief that maintaining good relations with the gods depended on performing rituals properly. The priests acted as guardians of these traditions. One of the most important groups of priests in Rome were the pontifices, members of the College of Pontiffs. The chief priest among them was known as the Pontifex Maximus, meaning the greatest bridge builder. The title symbolically referred to someone who maintained the bridge between the human world and the divine. The Pontifex Maximus supervised many aspects of Roman religious life. He oversaw sacred calendars, monitored religious festivals, and ensured that proper rituals were followed throughout the city. Over time, this role became one of the most influential religious positions in Roman society. Later in Roman history, even powerful political leaders would hold the title. Another important group of religious officials were the augurs. The augurs practiced a form of divination known as augury, which involved interpreting signs from nature to understand the will of the gods. Before important public decisions, such as declaring war, electing officials, or beginning major construction projects, the augurs might observe the flight patterns of birds in the sky. They believed that the behavior of birds could reveal whether the gods approved or disapproved of a particular action, that if the signs were favorable, the activity could proceed. If the omens were considered unfavorable, the decision might be postponed. To modern observers, this practice may seem unusual. But for the Romans, it was a serious and respected method of ensuring that their actions remained in harmony with divine intentions. Another group of priests practiced a different form of divination called haruspicy. Haruspices examined the internal organs of sacrificed animals, especially the liver, to interpret divine messages. These priests believed that unusual shapes, colors, or markings within the organs could reveal warnings or guidance from the gods. This practice had originally come from the neighboring Etruscan civilization and became an important part of Roman religious tradition. While some priests specialized in interpreting signs, others were responsible for maintaining sacred rituals connected to specific gods. Among the most famous of these were the Vestal Virgins. The Vestal Virgins were priestesses dedicated to the goddess Vesta, the divine protector of the hearth and the sacred fire of Rome. Their most important duty was to guard the eternal flame burning inside the temple of Vesta in the Roman Forum. This fire symbolized the safety and continuity of the Roman state itself. As long as the flame remained lit, Romans believed the city would remain protected. If the fire were ever to go out, it was considered a frightening omen suggesting danger for Rome. Because their responsibility was so important, the Vestal Virgins held a unique position in Roman society. They were chosen as young girls, often between the ages of 6 and 10, and served for 30 years. During this time, they lived together in a special residence near the temple and dedicated themselves to religious duties. Unlike most women in Roman society, the Vestal Virgins enjoyed certain privileges. They could own property, manage their own finances, and were treated with great respect in public. Yet their role also came with strict rules, including a vow of chastity during their years of service. The presence of the Vestal Virgins and the eternal flame created a powerful symbol of stability within the city. But Roman religion was not practiced only by priests and priestesses. Large public ceremonies involved many citizens. These rituals often took place at temples, which were among the most impressive buildings in Roman cities. Roman temples were designed differently from many modern religious buildings. While people today often gather inside churches, mosques, or synagogues for communal worship, Roman temples were primarily considered the houses of the gods themselves. The most sacred area was the inner chamber, known as the cella, where the statue of the god or goddess stood. Only priests typically entered this inner space. Most religious ceremonies actually took place outside the temple, at an altar positioned in front of the building. Here, sacrifices and offerings were made in view of the public. During these ceremonies, priests might wear special robes and cover their heads with part of their garments as a sign of reverence. Animals such as sheep, pigs, or cattle were sometimes offered as sacrifices to the gods. Before the sacrifice, the animal was carefully inspected to ensure it appeared healthy and suitable. Prayers were spoken, incense burned, and wine poured as part of the ritual. After the sacrifice, portions of the animal might be burned as an offering to the gods, while the rest was often shared among participants in a communal meal. These shared feasts reinforced the idea that religion was also about community and celebration. Temples themselves were often beautifully decorated. Tall columns supported triangular roofs. Sculptures and carvings showed scenes from mythology or symbols associated with particular gods. Inside the cella, the statue of the deity might be made from marble, bronze, or wood, sometimes adorned with gold, jewels, or fine clothing. These statues were not always seen as the god itself, but rather as a sacred representation that allowed people to focus their prayers. Throughout Rome and across the growing Roman world, temples were dedicated to many different gods and goddesses. Each one had its own rituals, festivals, and traditions maintained by priests and worshippers. The construction of a temple was itself considered a deeply religious act. Before building began, priests performed ceremonies to dedicate the ground to the god who would be honored there. This process ensured that the sacred space had been properly recognized by the divine powers believed to watch over the land. Over time, as Rome expanded its territory and influence, temples appeared not only in Rome, but throughout the vast regions controlled by the Roman Republic and later the Roman Empire. From the shores of Spain to the deserts of Syria, Roman temples created shared religious traditions that linked distant communities together. Yet despite the grandeur of these public rituals and magnificent buildings, Roman religion never completely lost its quiet, personal character. Even the most powerful leaders in Rome continued to honor household spirits in their homes. Just as ordinary families did, public ceremonies protected the state, while private rituals protected the family. Together, these two layers of religion formed a system that guided Roman life for centuries. But Roman religion was not only about priests and temples, it was also about celebration. Throughout the year, the Roman calendar was filled with festivals honoring different gods. These festivals transformed ordinary days into moments of music, feasting, games, and colorful public gatherings. To in the next part of our journey, we will explore these festivals and discover how the Roman calendar itself was shaped by religion. And as we will see, these celebrations brought together the sacred and the joyful in ways that filled the ancient city with energy, laughter, and tradition. If we could wander quietly through the streets of ancient Rome across the course of an entire year, we would quickly notice something remarkable. The Roman calendar was filled with festivals. Again and again, ordinary workdays would pause as the city entered a period of celebration dedicated to the gods. Markets might close, courts would suspend official business, and people would gather in temples, streets, and public spaces to participate in rituals that had been practiced for generations. For the Roman people, religion was not only about quiet household prayers or formal temple ceremonies. It was also about shared public experiences that brought the entire community together. These festivals were carefully arranged across the calendar, creating a rhythm that followed the changing seasons. Some festivals were ancient, reaching back to the earliest days of Rome, when the city was still a small agricultural settlement. Others developed later as the Roman Republic expanded and new religious traditions were adopted. Many of the earliest festivals were connected to farming. This made perfect sense in a society where survival depended on successful harvests. Important moments in the agricultural cycle, planting seeds, protecting crops, and gathering the harvest, were marked with rituals asking the gods for protection. 1 Early festivals celebrated the god Saturn, who was associated with agriculture and the abundance of the earth. This festival, known as Saturnalia, took place in December, when the hard work of the farming year had ended and winter had begun. Saturnalia was one of the most beloved festivals in Roman culture. During these days, the normal rules of society softened. Work paused, gifts were exchanged, and people gathered for feasts and games. Homes were decorated with greenery, and candles were lit to bring warmth and light during the darkest days of the year. 1 Unusual tradition during Saturnalia involved a temporary reversal of social roles. Enslaved people were sometimes allowed to sit at the table with their masters and share in the celebrations. Although this reversal lasted only briefly, it created a festive atmosphere where laughter and playfulness filled the city. But Saturnalia was only one of many celebrations. Earlier in the year, Romans celebrated festivals connected to purification and renewal. 1 of these was Lupercalia, held each February. Lupercalia had extremely ancient origins and was associated with fertility and the protection of livestock. During this festival, priests known as Luperci performed rituals believed to cleanse the city and encourage the fertility of both people and animals. The ceremonies took place near a cave on the Palatine Hill, where Roman legend claimed the twin founders of the city had once been cared for by a she-wolf. The festival included unusual rituals, including symbolic running through the streets and playful interactions with the crowd. Though it may seem strange today, many Romans believed these actions brought good fortune for the coming year. Another important celebration occurred in early spring and honored Mars, who was not only the god of war, but also a guardian of agriculture in early Roman tradition. The month of March, named after Mars, marked the beginning of the ancient Roman year. During this time, priests known as the Salii performed ritual dances through the streets while carrying sacred shields connected to the god. Their movements were accompanied by songs so ancient that even Romans in later centuries sometimes struggled to understand the original words. Yet the tradition continued faithfully, linking each generation to the distant past. Spring festivals often carried a feeling of renewal that as winter faded and the first green plants appeared again in fields and gardens. Romans celebrated the return of life and fertility to the land. Later in the spring came festivals honoring Ceres, protector of grain and harvests. These ceremonies were especially meaningful to farmers who depended on healthy crops for survival. Offerings were made, prayers were spoken, and games sometimes accompanied the rituals. Summer festivals also filled the Roman calendar. One important celebration honored Vesta, the divine guardian of the sacred fire and the home. During the festival known as Vestalia, the inner sanctuary of the Temple of Vesta was open to the public for a short time. Ordinarily, this sacred space was accessible only to the Vestal virgins who maintained the eternal flame. But during Vestalia, Roman women were allowed to enter and offer prayers for their households. They often walked barefoot to the temple as a sign of humility and respect. The festival emphasized the connection between the hearth of each Roman home and the sacred fire that symbolized the safety of the entire city. Later in the year, festivals remembered ancestors and honored the spirits of the dead. One such observance was Parentalia, held in February. During Parentalia, families visited the tombs of their relatives, bringing offerings of flowers, bread, and wine. These quiet rituals reflected the Roman belief that the spirits of ancestors remained connected to their families, by remembering the dead with care and respect. Romans believed they maintained harmony between the living and those who had passed on. In addition to these religious ceremonies, many festivals included public entertainment. Chariot races thundered around enormous stadiums, such as the Circus Maximus, where thousands of spectators gathered to cheer for their favorite teams. Theater performances, athletic competitions, and public feasts also formed part of many celebrations. For ordinary Romans, these festivals offered moments of joy and relaxation within lives that could otherwise be filled with hard work. But the festivals were not only about entertainment. They also reinforced shared traditions that connected people across the vast Roman world. When citizens gathered to celebrate the same rituals year after year, they strengthened their sense of belonging to a common culture. Religion, in this way, helped unite the Roman people. Even as Rome expanded into a powerful empire controlling distant lands and many different cultures, these festivals remained familiar and comforting traditions. They reminded Romans of their shared history and their relationship with the gods who were believed to watch over the city. And perhaps most importantly, the festivals created moments of brightness within the passing of time. They broke the long months into celebrations filled with music, laughter, and ceremonied in the quiet glow of oil lamps, in crowded temples decorated with garlands, and in the echoing roar of chariot races. The Roman people honored their gods while also celebrating life itself. Yet behind these joyful festivals stood a vast pantheon of divine figures, gods and goddesses with their own personalities, stories, and areas of power. Some ruled the sky and thunder. Others protected love, war, wisdom, or the in the next part of our journey. We will meet these gods of Rome and explore how their identities developed over time. And as we will see, many of them were deeply influenced by the myths of another famous ancient civilization, the Greeks. As evening settles once again over the ancient city of Rome, the marble temples glow softly in the fading light. The crowds in the marketplaces begin to thin, and the sounds of the city grow quieter. Yet within the Roman imagination, the world is still alive with divine presences. The Romans believed in many gods. Some were ancient spirits whose origins stretched far back into the earliest farming villages of Italy. Others arrived later, adopted from neighboring cultures as Rome expanded its influence across the Mediterranean world. Over time, these many divine figures formed what we now call the Roman pantheon, a vast family of gods and goddesses who governed different aspects of life. At the very top of this divine order stood the king of the gods, Jupiter. Jupiter was the god of the sky and thunder, the ruler of storms, lightning, and the vast heavens above the earth. His authority symbolized power, justice, and protection over the Roman state itself. High on Capitoline Hill stood his grand temple, where he was worshipped as Jupiter Optimus Maximus, meaning Jupiter, the best and greatest. This temple was one of the most important religious sites in Rome. Victorious generals often came here after successful campaigns to thank Jupiter for their triumphs. Government officials also performed ceremonies in his honor, asking for guidance and protection over the Republic and later the Empire. If Jupiter ruled the sky, another powerful god ruled war. This was Mars. Today, many people think of Mars mainly as a warlike figure, but in early Roman religion, he had a broader role. Mars was also connected to agriculture and the protection of farmland. This may seem surprising at first, but for early Romans, the defense of crops and the defense of territory were closely linked. A strong warrior protected the land just as surely as a farmer cultivated it. Mars was especially important because he was believed to be the divine father of Romulus, the legendary founder of the city. Through this connection, Romans saw Mars as a kind of ancestral protector of their entire civilization. Another important figure in Roman religion was Juno, the wife of Jupiter. Juno was associated with marriage, childbirth, and the protection of women. She was often honored by Roman brides and mothers who prayed for healthy families and safe births. Alongside Jupiter and Juno stood Minerva, a goddess connected to wisdom, crafts, learning, and strategic thinking. Minerva was believed to guide artists, teachers, and skilled workers. Her presence represented intelligence and careful planning rather than brute force. Together, Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva formed an important triad of gods worshipped at the great Capitoline Temple. But the Roman pantheon included many more divine figures, each connected to different parts of life. For example, the sea was ruled by Neptune. Sailors prayed to Neptune before setting out across dangerous waters. Storms, waves, and earthquakes were believed to fall under his power. Love and beauty were associated with Venus. Venus represented attraction, fertility, and the powerful emotional forces that connected people to one another. Over time, Romans also came to see her as a divine ancestor of their people through the legendary Trojan hero Aeneas, who was said to be her son. Through Aeneas, Venus became symbolically linked to the destiny of Rome itself. Another familiar figure was Mercury. Mercury was the swift messenger of the gods, often associated with travel, trade, communication, and sometimes cleverness or trickery. Merchants and travelers frequently honored Mercury, hoping for safe journeys and successful business ventures. There was also Diana, protector of forests, wild animals, and the moonlit wilderness. Diana represented independence and the quiet power of nature. She was often depicted carrying a bow while roaming through forests with her companions. Meanwhile, the glowing sun itself was associated with divine power through figures such as Sol, whose daily journey across the sky reminded Romans of the steady rhythm of the universe. Despite this wide variety of gods, Roman religion was less focused on dramatic stories than the myths of the Greeks. In fact, many of the stories we associate with Roman gods today actually came from Greek mythology. Roman culture encountered the highly developed myths of ancient Greece. Romans began identifying their gods with Greek counterparts. For example, Jupiter became closely associated with the Greek god Zeus. Mars was linked with Ares. Venus was connected with Aphrodite. Mercury resembled Hermes because Greek literature and storytelling were already extremely rich. Roman writers adopted many of these myths and retold them with Roman names. This blending of traditions gradually gave Roman religion a more detailed mythology filled with stories of divine adventures, rivalries, and romances. Yet even with these stories, Roman religion remained strongly focused on rituals rather than myths. Romans did not necessarily need dramatic stories about the gods in order to worship them. What mattered most was honoring the gods properly through ceremonies, prayers, and offerings. In many ways, the Roman relationship with their gods was practical. Each god governed certain areas of life, and people asked for help in those specific areas. Farmers prayed for healthy crops. Soldiers prayed for victory in battle. Sailors prayed for calm seas. Parents prayed for the safety of their children. This system created a vast network of divine relationships connecting every part of Roman life to the sacred world. But there was another fascinating element of Roman religion that shaped many important decisions: the interpretation of signs and omens. Romans believed the gods communicated with humans through subtle signals hidden within the natural world, a sudden flash of lightning, the unexpected behavior of birds, strange events during a ritual. All of these might be interpreted as messages from the divine. In the next part of our journey, we will explore this mysterious practice of divination, the art of reading signs from the gods. And as we will see, Roman leaders sometimes delayed wars, elections, or major political decisions simply because the signs from the heavens suggested that the timing was not yet right. Imagine standing quietly in the early morning outside the ancient city of Rome. The sky is pale with the first light of dawn. The air is still. Far away, birds begin to move across the sky in slow patterns. To an ordinary traveler, it might seem like a peaceful and ordinary moment, but to many Romans, scenes like this could carry deep meaning. The Roman people believed that the gods did not remain silent. Instead, the divine world was constantly sending signals to the human world, small hints and warnings hidden within nature. These messages were known as omens, and omen could appear in many different ways. It might be the sudden flash of lightning during a ceremony. It could be the unusual behavior of animals. Sometimes it might even be an unexpected sound, a strange dream, or an accident that occurred at an important moment. The Romans believed that careful observers could interpret these signs and discover the will of the gods. This practice was called divination. Divination did not always involve mystical visions or dramatic prophecies. Instead, it was often a calm and structured process carried out by trained religious officials. One of the most respected forms of divination involved observing birds in the sky. This practice was known as augury, and it was performed by priests called augurs. Augurs carefully watched the flight patterns, calls, and behavior of birds. Certain species were considered especially important messengers from the gods. For example, the appearance of an eagle soaring high above could be interpreted as a powerful sign of divine approval if birds flew in particular directions, or if their movements followed specific patterns. The augurs might declare that the gods favored a particular action, but if the birds behaved strangely, or if their signs were considered unfavorable, important plans might be delayed. This may sound surprising today, but in ancient Rome the results of augury could influence major decisions. Before an army marched into battle, commanders might ask the augurs to read the signs. Before elections were held, officials sometimes consulted the augurs to confirm that the day was religiously acceptable. Even the construction of buildings, roads, and temples might begin only after favorable omens had been observed. Another form of divination involved the examination of sacrificed animals. This practice was carried out by specialists known as haruspices. The haruspices originally came from the nearby Etruscan civilization, but their techniques became widely respected in Roman religion. After an animal sacrifice, the haruspices carefully studied the animal's internal organs, especially the liver. They believed that the gods might reveal messages through unusual markings, shapes, or colors in these organs. Special diagrams and models of livers were sometimes used to help interpret these signs. Each section of the liver was thought to correspond with different divine powers. If something appeared unusual or unexpected, it might be interpreted as a warning from the gods in times of crisis, such as natural disasters or military defeats. The Roman Senate might even summon Etruscan haruspices to analyze strange events and advise the government on how to respond. But divination was not limited to professional priests. Ordinary Romans also paid attention to everyday omens. For example, a person beginning an important journey might pause if they stumbled while leaving their house. This small accident might be interpreted as a sign that the timing was not right. Similarly, the sudden cry of certain birds, the unexpected appearance of an animal, or even the breaking of an object could sometimes be interpreted as a meaningful signal. Dreams were another important source of possible divine communication. Romans believed that dreams could occasionally carry messages from the gods or from the spirits of the dead. Some dreams were interpreted as warnings, while others were seen as encouragement or guidance. In temples dedicated to healing gods, people sometimes even slept overnight in sacred spaces hoping to receive a meaningful dream. Lightning and thunder were especially powerful omens. Because the sky was ruled by Jupiter, sudden lightning strikes were often interpreted as direct expressions of his will. If lightning struck a particular location, priests might mark the site as sacred. Rituals would then be performed to acknowledge the divine event. Sometimes the meaning of an omen was not immediately clear. When this happened, priests might consult sacred texts known as the Sibylline books. These mysterious writings were believed to contain prophecies and instructions for dealing with unusual events or crises. According to Roman tradition, the Sibylline books had originally been purchased from a prophetic woman known as the Sibyl many centuries earlier. They were stored carefully and consulted only during times of great danger, such as famine, plague, or military threats. When priests studied these texts, they searched for instructions about what rituals or sacrifices might restore harmony between the city and the gods. Often the recommended solution involved performing new ceremonies or inviting the worship of a foreign god who might help solve the crisis. Through practices like augury, haruspicy, and prophetic consultation, the Romans developed a system that allowed them to interpret the unpredictable events of life. To modern observers, this system might seem unusual or overly cautious. But in the ancient world, where natural disasters and sudden misfortune were common, these practices offered a sense of structure and reassurance. If something went wrong, the Romans believed it might be possible to discover the cause through divine signs, and then correct the problem through proper rituals. In this way, divination became closely connected to Roman politics. Government leaders rarely ignored religious signs. A general who marched into battle against unfavorable omens risked appearing reckless or disrespectful toward the gods. Even powerful rulers often waited patiently for signs of approval before making major decisions. This careful attention to divine signals reflected a deeper belief held by many Romans. They believed that success, whether in farming, politics, or warfare, depended not only on human skill but also on maintaining harmony with the divine order of the universe. When the gods were honored properly, the world remained balanced. When rituals were neglected, or when arrogance led people to ignore divine warnings, trouble might follow. Because of this belief, Roman religion encouraged patience, observation, and respect for tradition. Even something as small as the flight of birds across the morning sky could influence the fate of armies, cities, and empires. Yet religion in Rome was not only about interpreting signs. It was also deeply connected to political power and the identity of the Roman state itself. In the next part of our journey, we will explore how religion and government became closely linked during the time of the Roman Republic, and we will see how leaders used religious rituals, sacred authority, and public ceremonies to guide, and sometimes shape, the destiny of Rome itself. As the city of Rome slowly expanded from a cluster of villages into a powerful republic, religion did not remain separate from political life. Instead, the two became deeply connected. For the Roman people, the prosperity of their state was believed to depend on maintaining the favor of the gods. If the gods were respected, Rome would flourish. If rituals were neglected, the balance between the human world and the divine world might weaken. Because of this belief, religious ceremonies often accompanied major political events. Meetings of the Senate might begin with prayers or sacrifices. Before important votes were taken, priests could observe omens to ensure the timing was acceptable to the gods. Even military campaigns were shaped by religion. Before marching into battle, Roman commanders frequently offered sacrifices and asked for divine approval. Soldiers sometimes carried sacred symbols or standards believed to carry the protection of the gods. Victory itself was often interpreted as proof that the gods supported Rome. After a successful military campaign, a general might celebrate a magnificent public ceremony known as a triumph. During a triumph, the victorious commander rode through the streets of Rome in a grand procession. Crowds filled the city to watch as soldiers marched, treasures captured in war were displayed, and sacred offerings were prepared for the gods. The procession often ended at the great temple of Jupiter on Capitoline Hill, where the general thanked Jupiter for granting victory. In this way, military success became a religious event as well as a political one. Religion also shaped the Roman calendar used by government officials. Certain days were considered sacred or unsuitable for political activity. These days were marked carefully so that courts, elections, and public meetings would not conflict with important religious observances. Priests played a key role in maintaining this calendar and advising political leaders. One particularly influential religious office was the Pontifex Maximus, the chief priest responsible for overseeing many aspects of Roman religious life. Over time, powerful political figures began holding this position as well. This created an even stronger link between religious authority and government power. During the later years of the Roman Republic, ambitious leaders sometimes used religious traditions to strengthen their political influence. Public ceremonies, temple construction, and grand festivals allowed leaders to demonstrate their devotion to the gods while also gaining popularity among the people. Religion helped create a sense of shared identity among the Roman population. By participating in the same rituals and festivals, citizens felt connected to the long traditions of their ancestors and to the future of the Roman state. Yet as Rome expanded across the Mediterranean, it encountered many different cultures and belief systems. And rather than rejecting these foreign religions, the Romans often did something quite unusual. They welcomed them. As Roman armies and merchants traveled across distant lands, they encountered an astonishing variety of religious traditions. Temples dedicated to unfamiliar gods appeared in cities from Egypt to Asia Minor, from Gaul to the deserts of the Near East. Instead of suppressing these beliefs, the Romans often showed remarkable curiosity and openness toward them. If a foreign god appeared powerful or popular, Romans sometimes adopted that god into their own religious system. This flexibility helped Roman religion grow into an enormous and diverse network of beliefs. One example came from Egypt with the worship of Isis. Isis was a goddess associated with protection, motherhood, and magical power. Her worship spread widely across the Mediterranean world, and temples dedicated to her appeared even in the city of Rome itself. Another influential foreign god was Mithras, whose worship became popular among Roman soldiers. The cult of Mithras involved secret ceremonies performed in underground temples. Initiates believed they were participating in sacred mysteries that symbolized cosmic struggles between light and darkness. Unlike traditional Roman religious rituals, which were usually public, the worship of Mithras was private and reserved for members who had undergone special initiation. These kinds of religious groups were sometimes called mystery religions. They offered something slightly different from traditional Roman worship, while the official religion of Rome focused mainly on maintaining harmony between the state and the gods. Mystery religions often emphasized personal spiritual experiences and promises of life after death. For some people living in the vast and sometimes uncertain Roman world, these beliefs provided comfort and meaning at the same time. Traditional Roman gods remained important. Temples to Venus, Mars, and Jupiter continued to receive offerings and public ceremonies. Roman religion gradually became a blend of ancient Italian traditions, Greek mythology, and newly adopted foreign beliefs. This mixture reflected the nature of the Roman Empire itself. Rome ruled over people from many cultures, languages, and traditions. Allowing different religions to coexist helped maintain stability across the empire. However, this religious flexibility would eventually encounter a belief system very different from the others. That a new religion would appear that did not easily blend into the Roman tradition of shared worship. And over time, that new religion would change the spiritual landscape of the Roman world forever. By the first centuries of the Roman Empire, the religious world of Rome had become incredibly diverse. Ancient household rituals still existed. Traditional temples continued to receive offerings. Mystery religions attracted devoted followers, but alongside all of these traditions, a new faith slowly began to spread. This was the religion that would later become known as Christianity. Unlike many religions Rome had encountered before, Christianity was not easily absorbed into the traditional Roman system. Roman religion generally allowed people to worship many gods at once. A person might honor Jupiter, pray to household spirits, and also participate in a mystery cult. But Christianity taught that there was only one true God. Because of this belief, early Christians often refused to participate in traditional Roman sacrifices or ceremonies honoring the gods of the state, to Roman authorities. This refusal sometimes appeared dangerous. Religious rituals were believed to protect the entire empire, and refusing to participate could be interpreted as a rejection of Roman unity at various points in history. This led to tensions and occasional persecution of Christian communities. Yet Christianity continued to grow. It spread through cities and towns across the empire, carried by travelers, merchants, and missionaries. Eventually, during the reign of the Emperor Constantine the Great, an important change occurred in the year 313 CE. Constantine issued the Edict of Milan, which granted legal protection to Christians and allowed them to worship openly. Over the following decades, Christianity gained increasing influence. Traditional Roman religious practices gradually declined, though many continued quietly for generations. By the end of the 4th century, Christianity had become the dominant religion of the Roman Empire. The temples that once honored Jupiter, Mars, and Venus slowly fell silent. The sacred fires tended by the Vestal Virgins were eventually extinguished. Yet the legacy of Roman religion did not disappear completely. Many elements of Roman religious culture, its festivals, its symbolism, and even parts of its calendar, continued to influence later societies. And when we look back across the long history of Rome, we can still see how deeply religion shaped the lives of its people. From the quiet prayers whispered beside household shrines, to the grand festivals filling the streets with celebration, to the careful reading of omens in the sky, religion was woven into nearly every moment of Roman life. It offered explanations for the mysteries of nature, guidance for political leaders, and comfort during uncertain times. And though the temples of ancient Rome now stand mostly as ruins beneath the open sky, the stories of its gods and rituals continue to echo across history. Like distant voices carried on the evening wind, they remind us of a civilization that once believed the world was alive with divine presence.